This is Officer Riley from the city police. And there it was. That moment when time does that weird slow motion thing and your brain starts cataloging every terrible possibility at once. Did I forget to pay a parking ticket? Did someone steal my identity? Did my mother finally make good on her threat to report me for never calling? Your wife's been in an accident, he continued, and my heart just stopped. Like someone had yanked the emergency brake on my entire cardiovascular system. You should come to the ER immediately. I was already grabbing my keys, my mind racing faster than a caffeinated squirrel. Harper. My wife Harper. The woman who couldn't walk past a coffee shop without stopping for a matcha latte. The one who did hot yoga 3 times a week and said things like, "I'm really working on my core strength," while eating cheese fries. That Harper was hurt, and I needed to get to her right now. But then Officer Riley added, almost casually, like he was mentioning the weather, "We found her with another man. You might want to hurry." I swear to God, I nearly dropped my phone. Another man? Another man? My brain short-circuited like a cheap laptop trying to run Photoshop. For a solid 5 seconds, I just stood there in my office, keys dangling from my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. It was like my mind was a computer that had just encountered a fatal error and needed to restart. Harper. My wife Harper. Queen of self-care Sundays and girls' weekends in wine country. The woman who'd told me just last month that she needed space to find herself and had apparently found herself right into someone else's passenger seat, or driver's seat, or whatever seat she was occupying when things went south. The sarcastic part of my brain, which, let's be honest, is about 90% of my brain, immediately kicked in with commentary. Great. Just fantastic. My wife had upgraded from yoga retreats and book clubs to car crash couple therapy. This was fine. Everything was fine. I was totally fine. Spoiler alert, I was not fine. I grabbed my jacket and bolted out the door, my neighbor Mrs. Henderson giving me a weird look as I practically sprinted to my car. She was out watering her roses, as usual, probably judging everyone who passed by. "Everything okay, dear?" she called out, and I just waved without stopping because how exactly do you explain this situation? "Oh yeah, Mrs. Henderson, just peachy. My wife's in the hospital after crashing with her secret boyfriend. Want to borrow some sugar?" The drive to the hospital was a blur of racing thoughts and increasingly creative curse words. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, I'm surprised I didn't leave permanent fingerprints. The whole time, my mind was spinning like a hamster wheel on steroids. Was she hurt badly? Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? And why? Did my stomach feel this bizarre mixture of fear, anger, and what I can only describe as vindication? Because here's the thing nobody tells you about suspecting your spouse of cheating. Part of you actually hopes you're wrong. You hope you're just being paranoid, that you're the crazy one for noticing how she stopped asking about your day or how her phone was suddenly password protected. But another part of you, that dark little corner that you don't like to acknowledge, kind of wants to be right. Just so you know you weren't losing your mind. Just so you have confirmation that your gut wasn't lying to you. I pulled into the ER parking lot doing about 20 over the speed limit and nearly took out a trash can. A security guard shouted something at me, but I was already jogging toward the entrance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The automatic doors opened with that pneumatic hiss, and I was hit with that unmistakable hospital smell, antiseptic, floor wax, and desperation. The receptionist, a woman with glasses that made her look like an owl, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "Carter. My wife, Harper Carter. She was in an accident. I got a call from Officer Riley." She typed something, nodded, and pointed down a hallway. "3rd floor, trauma wing. Elevator's that way." I didn't wait for the elevator. I hit the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my dress shoes squeaking on the linoleum like I was in some kind of demented musical number. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I was winded and my shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. That's when I saw him. The doctor. He was standing outside a room, holding a tablet, looking like he'd been awake for about 72 consecutive hours. Coffee stains decorated his white coat like abstract art, and his eyes had that distant, haunted quality that doctors get when they've seen too much and slept too little. He looked up as I approached, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. "Mr. Carter?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "That's me. Where's my wife? Is she okay?" He glanced at the door behind him, then back at me. "Sir, please sit down for a moment." I don't want to sit down. I want to see Harper. The doctor sighed, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of 1,000 difficult conversations. Mr. Carter, what you're about to see might shock you. I need you to prepare yourself. Prepare myself? How exactly does one prepare for a moment like this? Deep breathing? Meditation? A shot of whiskey? I nodded anyway, because what else was I going to do? He pushed open the door, and we walked into the room. The lights were dim, machines beeping softly in that rhythmic way that somehow sounds both comforting and terrifying. And there, in the bed, was a figure covered with a white sheet. My throat tightened. My palms started sweating. Every muscle in my body tensed up like I was about to be hit by a truck. The doctor reached for the sheet, his fingers gripping the edge. He looked at me one more time, a final warning in his eyes, and then pulled it back slowly, deliberately, like he was revealing a magic trick gone horribly wrong. And I almost forgot how to breathe. There she was, Harper, my wife of 7 years, the woman who'd promised to love, honor, and apparently test drive luxury vehicles with strange men. She was lying there, pale as a ghost, bruised like she'd gone 12 rounds with Mike Tyson, and barely recognizable under all the medical equipment they had her hooked up to. Her face was swollen on one side. There was a bandage wrapped around her head, and her arm was in a cast that someone had already started signing, which felt wildly inappropriate given the circumstances. But here's the kicker, the real cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. She wasn't alone in that room. Beside her, in another hospital bed that had been wheeled in, was a man I'd never seen before in my entire life. And trust me, I would have remembered this guy. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a cologne commercial, the kind where everyone's on a yacht and nobody's wearing enough clothes. Tattoos snaked up both his arms in that calculated way that screams, I paid a lot of money to look this edgy. He had a designer watch on his wrist, a Rolex, because of course it was a Rolex, and no shirt, just bandages wrapped around his torso. His hair was perfectly styled even in unconsciousness, which felt like a personal insult. This was the type of guy who definitely ordered oat milk lattes at overpriced coffee shops and said things like, let's manifest abundance, without a trace of irony. The kind of dude who probably had a podcast about entrepreneurship and wellness, and whose Instagram bio definitely included the words life coach and digital nomad. I hated him immediately, which was convenient because apparently my wife had been manifest abundancing all over him. The doctor cleared his throat, pulling me out of my mental spiral. Mr. Carter, your wife and her companion were found unconscious in a wrecked convertible near Crystal Lake. They were alone, traveling at high speed according to witnesses. Companion. That was a nice, sanitized way to put it. Like he was her travel buddy or her bridge partner, not the guy she was apparently sneaking around with behind my back. I appreciated the doctor's attempt at professionalism, but we all knew what companion meant in this context. A convertible, I said, my voice coming out weird and flat. Of course it was a convertible, because a responsible sedan would have been too practical for whatever midlife crisis nonsense this is. The doctor didn't react to my sarcasm, which was probably for the best. He'd probably heard worse from other devastated spouses who'd just discovered their marriages were elaborate lies. The vehicle was registered to Mr. Miles Trent, he said, gesturing to the tattoo model in the other bed. According to the police report, they were driving erratically before they lost control on the Lake Road. Miles Trent. Even his name sounded pretentious. I bet he introduced himself at parties with both names, like he was James Bond or something. Hi, I'm Miles Trent, and I steal other men's wives and drive convertibles into lakes. I moved closer to Harper's bed, studying her face. Even with all the bruises and swelling, she was still beautiful. That was the worst part. 7 years of marriage, and she could still make my heart do that stupid flutter thing. Even now, when I should be furious, when I was furious, part of me just wanted her to wake up and tell me this was all some horrible misunderstanding. That Miles Trent was actually her long-lost cousin, or a rideshare driver she'd gotten stuck with, or literally anything other than what my brain was screaming at me. Sir, the doctor said, his voice taking on that careful, measured tone that medical professionals use when they're about to drop a bomb. I need to tell you something about Mr. Trent. I turned away from Harper, trying to read the doctor's expression. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clutching that tablet like it was a life preserver. Let me guess, I said, he's a yoga instructor. or a life coach, or one of those guys who sells cryptocurrency and essential oils. He's not manifesting anything anymore, the doctor said quietly. It took my brain a second to catch up. Wait, what? Mr. Trent didn't survive the accident, Mr. Carter. I'm very sorry. The room suddenly felt about 20 degrees colder. Dead. The guy was dead. My wife's boyfriend, God, that word tasted like poison in my mouth, was lying there dead in a hospital bed not 5 feet from where I was standing. I looked at him again, really looked at him this time. His chest wasn't moving. The machines around him were silent. He wasn't sleeping or unconscious. He was just gone. My brain, in its infinite wisdom and impeccable timing, decided this was the perfect moment to crack a joke. So she really drove him crazy, huh? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. It was morbid. It was inappropriate. It was probably the worst thing I could have said in that moment. But that's what I do when life gets too real. I make jokes. It's either laugh or completely fall apart. And I wasn't ready to fall apart yet. Not here. Not in front of this doctor with his coffee-stained coat and his pitying eyes. The doctor didn't laugh. He just stared at me with this mixture of concern and professional disapproval, like he was trying to figure out if I needed a psych evaluation. Mr. Carter, I understand this is shocking. Shocking. I let out a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. Doc, shocking is when you find out your favorite TV show got canceled. Shocking is when you bite into what you think is a chocolate chip cookie and it's actually raisin. This. I gestured wildly at the room, at Harper, at the dead guy in the designer watch. This is a Jerry Springer episode come to life. A nurse poked her head in, probably checking to see if the crazy person was becoming a security risk. The doctor waved her off, then turned back to me with that same careful expression. Sir, there's something more you need to know. But not here. This conversation needs to happen somewhere private. Can you come with me? And there it was. That sentence. Those words that every person dreads hearing because they only mean one thing. Whatever you think is bad right now is about to get exponentially worse. When a doctor uses a tone that low, that serious, that loaded with unspoken meaning, you just know your life is about to turn into a Netflix limited series. The kind with a true crime documentary and a Reddit thread dedicated to analyzing every detail. I glanced back at Harper one more time. She looked so small in that hospital bed, swallowed up by white sheets and medical equipment. Part of me wanted to stay, to hold her hand, to be there when she woke up. But a bigger part of me, the part that was running on pure adrenaline and disbelief, needed answers more than I needed to play the devoted husband role. Yeah, I said, following the doctor toward the door. Lead the way, document. Can't wait to hear what fresh hell is waiting for me next. As we walked out into the hallway, I couldn't shake the image of Miles Trent lying there, perfectly styled and permanently silent. My wife had been with him. My wife had crashed with him. And now my wife was alive while he was dead, and something about that math didn't add up. The doctor led me down the corridor, past rooms filled with other people's tragedies, and I realized with crystal clarity that my Thursday had officially gone from mediocre to absolutely catastrophic. And apparently, it was about to get worse. Officer Riley was waiting for us in what I can only describe as the world's most depressing conference room. You know the type, fluorescent lights that make everyone look like they're auditioning for a zombie movie, a table that's seen better decades, and chairs that squeak every time you breathe. There was a vending machine in the corner humming ominously, and a motivational poster on the wall that said, "Hang in there," with a cat dangling from a branch. Real uplifting stuff. Riley himself looked like every cop you've ever seen on TV, tired eyes, coffee addiction, and a mustache that had probably been in style sometime during the Reagan administration. He had a file folder in front of him that looked suspiciously thick for what should have been a simple car accident report. Never a good sign when the paperwork is chunky. "Mr. Carter," he said, gesturing to one of the squeaky chairs. "Thanks for coming. I know this is difficult." Difficult, right? That's one word for discovering your wife was joyriding with a dead guy. I sat down, the chair protesting loudly under my weight, and waited for whatever bomb was about to drop. Riley opened the folder, and I caught a glimpse of photos. The wrecked convertible, I assumed, though from my angle it looked like twisted metal and shattered dreams. "The man your wife was with," he began, pulling out what looked like a driver's license. His name was Miles Trent. Age 34. Owner of Trent Luxury Motors, that high-end dealership on Fifth Avenue. Of course. Of course he owned a luxury car dealership. Because my wife couldn't have an affair with a regular guy who worked at Best Buy or managed a Wendy's. No, she had to upgrade to someone who sold Range Rovers and Porsches to people with more money than common sense. Trent Luxury Motors. I repeated, the name tasting bitter. I've seen their commercials. The ones with the guy standing in front of a mansion talking about lifestyle investments. Riley nodded. That was him. And according to our records, Mr. Trent was, he paused, choosing his words carefully, a known player in the dating scene. We've had a few complaints filed against him over the years. Nothing that stuck, but enough to establish a pattern. A player. My wife had picked a certified, documented, police file-having player. This just kept getting better. I could practically feel my blood pressure climbing with each new revelation. So what you're telling me, I said, leaning back in the squeaky chair, is that my wife was having an affair with a sleazy car salesman who apparently collected women like they were limited edition vehicles. I wouldn't phrase it exactly that way, but yes, essentially. Riley pulled out a notepad that looked like it had survived several natural disasters. Now, Mr. Carter, I need to ask you some questions. Standard procedure in cases like this. Cases like this. Like there was a whole category for wife crashes with dead boyfriend. Maybe it was more common than I thought. Maybe there was a support group. Wednesdays at 7. Bring your own tissues and unresolved trauma. How long had you known about the affair? Riley asked, pen poised over paper. I didn't, I said flatly. Apparently, I'm the last person in this story to get the memo. Should I have been subscribing to a newsletter or something? Riley didn't smile, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe. Or pity. Hard to tell. Had your wife been acting strangely recently? Any changes in behavior? Unexplained absences? Unusual spending? I thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. Harper had been doing a lot of those girls' weekends lately. There was that yoga retreat in Sedona that lasted 5 days. The book club that seemed to meet at weird hours. The sudden interest in self-improvement seminars that required overnight stays. She's been going to a lot of yoga, I said, feeling stupider by the second. And there were these weekend trips. Girls' trips, she said. Wine country, spa resorts, that kind of thing. I thought she was just, I don't know, doing the self-care thing that everyone's obsessed with these days. Riley wrote something down, and I caught a glimpse of his notes. Husband unaware. Multiple absences. Possible long-term affair. Great. Now I was officially documented as the oblivious idiot husband. They'd probably teach a class about me at the police academy. How to spot the warning signs. A case study in male stupidity. Mr. Carter, I need to show you something. Riley pulled out an evidence bag, the kind you see on crime shows, and placed it on the table between us. These items were recovered from the vehicle. You might want to prepare yourself. I was getting really tired of people telling me to prepare myself. How exactly does one prepare for a parade of humiliation? Deep breathing? Meditation? A lobotomy? Inside the bag was a champagne bottle, half-finished, expensive-looking, the kind with a French name I couldn't pronounce. Next to it was a piece of black lace that I really didn't want to examine too closely, but was definitely lingerie. And then there was a card, cream-colored, expensive stationery, the kind you buy at boutique stores that smell like vanilla and charge $15 for a pack of 3. Riley pulled the card out with gloved hands and read it aloud. Because apparently this humiliation needed a soundtrack. You make me feel alive. 4 words. 4 simple, cliché, greeting card-aisle words that somehow managed to gut me more than everything else combined. I sat there, staring at that card, at Harper's handwriting. I recognized it, the way she made her Y's with that little flourish, and something inside me just cracked. You make me feel alive. I repeated, my voice coming out weird and hollow. That's beautiful. Really, should I get it tattooed? Maybe cross-stitched on a pillow. The sarcasm was armor, and I was wearing it like my life depended on it. Because the alternative was acknowledging that my wife had written those words to someone else. That she'd felt more alive with Miles Trent, luxury car dealer and documented player, than she'd ever felt with me. Riley mercifully put the card back in the evidence bag. Mr. Carter, I know this is painful. You know what the worst part is? I interrupted, surprising myself. I thought about writing her a love note just last week. For our anniversary. Something romantic, you know? But I didn't because I figured it would be cheesy. that she'd laugh at me for being sappy. And meanwhile, she's out here writing sonnets to a guy who sells overpriced cars to midlife crisis victims. A younger officer poked his head in, whispered something to Riley, and disappeared again. Riley's expression shifted, got more serious somehow, which I didn't think was possible. "There's more," he said, which were quickly becoming my least favorite two words in the English language. "We found additional items in the car. Personal effects that suggest this wasn't their first meeting." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos. Receipts from fancy restaurants. The kind where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Hotel key cards from places in the city and out of state. Tickets to a jazz concert from 3 months ago. 3 months. This had been going on for at least 3 months, probably longer. While I was working overtime to pay for our mortgage, Harper was out collecting hotel key cards like they were Pokemon. I thought about replying to that love note with something like, "She made my Wi-Fi bill feel alive too." But even my sarcasm was getting tired. Riley closed his phone and looked at me with something approaching genuine concern. "Mr. Carter, is there anything else you can tell us? Anything that might help us understand what happened tonight?" "Yeah," I said, standing up because I couldn't sit in that squeaky chair for another second. "I can tell you that I clearly don't know my wife at all, that I'm apparently the world's biggest idiot, and that I really, really need a drink." But before I could make it to the door, before I could escape this fluorescent nightmare, the doctor appeared in the doorway. His expression had shifted from tired to grim, and he was holding what looked like lab results. "Mr. Carter," he said, and I knew. I just knew that whatever he was about to say was going to make everything else look like a warm-up act. "We got your wife's blood work back. There's something we found that changes everything." The doctor led us into a smaller room, an office that looked like it belonged to someone who'd given up on organization around the same time I'd given up on my marriage, apparently. Medical journals were stacked haphazardly on every surface. There was a half-eaten sandwich on the desk that looked concerningly old, and the computer monitor had so many sticky notes attached to it that I couldn't tell what color the actual screen was. This was where you brought people for bad news. I could tell because there was a box of tissues strategically placed on the corner of the desk, the universal symbol for "you're about to ugly cry." Dr. Levin. I'd finally caught his name from the ID badge dangling from his pocket, pulled up something on his computer, squinting at the screen like he was trying to decode ancient hieroglyphics. Officer Riley stood by the door, arms crossed, looking like he was expecting me to either pass out or throw a punch. Fair assessment, honestly. I was considering both options. "Mr. Carter," the doctor began, and I was already exhausted by how many times I'd heard my name said in that careful, patronizing tone tonight. "Your wife's toxicology report came back, and there are some concerning findings." Concerning. Another one of those words that medical professionals use when they mean absolutely terrifying, but we're trained to stay calm. "Her blood contained traces of morphine." He continued, clicking through screens that showed a bunch of numbers and chemical formulas that might as well have been written in Klingon for all I understood them. "Morphine," I repeated slowly. "Like the painkiller? The stuff they give people after surgery?" "Yes, but here's where it gets complicated." Dr. Levin pulled up another screen, this one showing a molecular structure that looked like a demented game of connect the dots. "There's another substance in her system, something we don't usually see. It's experimental, not approved by the FDA, and definitely not something you can pick up at your local CVS." My brain was struggling to keep up. Morphine was bad enough, but experimental drugs? This was starting to sound less like a car accident and more like a rejected script for a medical thriller. "Experimental," I said. "You mean like what? Some kind of research chemical? Designer drug? Possibly," the doctor said, which was not the definitive answer I was hoping for. "The compound shares similarities with certain sedatives used in clinical trials, but the specific formulation doesn't match anything in our database. Someone modified it, enhanced it somehow." Officer Riley stepped forward, his cop instincts clearly kicking in. "Are you saying Mrs. Carter was drugged?" Dr. Levin hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. When doctors pause like that, when they choose their words that carefully, it's never because they're about to say something reassuring. It's possible she was drugged against her will, yes, but it's also possible she took it willingly. The concentration in her bloodstream suggests it was administered sometime within 2 hours of the accident. Either way, She wasn't in control of her faculties when that car crashed. Not in control. My wife, who could barely handle 2 glasses of wine without getting giggly, had been pumped full of morphine and some kind of experimental sedative cocktail. And she'd been driving. Or maybe Miles had been driving. The police report wasn't clear on that detail, and honestly, at this point, did it even matter? So what you're telling me, I said, because sarcasm was still the only thing keeping me upright, is that my wife was high as a kite on some kind of pharmaceutical speedball when she crashed. That's a crude way to put it, but essentially accurate, Dr. Levin said, and I appreciated that he didn't try to sugarcoat it. Officer Riley pulled out his notepad again, flipping to a new page. Mr. Carter, did your wife have any history of drug use? Prescription medication abuse, recreational substances, anything like that? I almost laughed. Harper? The woman who lectured me about having too much caffeine? The one who did juice cleanses and posted Instagram stories about her meditation practice? No. Harper is a health nut. She takes vitamins that cost more than my car payment and drinks smoothies that taste like grass clippings. The strongest thing she usually touches is kombucha, and she acts like that's living dangerously. Riley wrote something down, probably another note about how clueless I was about my own wife's secret life. The vehicle she crashed, he said, changing topics. We confirmed it was registered to Miles Trent. A 2024 Porsche 911 Carrera, worth about $120,000. Of course it was a Porsche, because a Honda Civic would have been too pedestrian for my wife's affair. She had to go full midlife crisis, complete with a luxury vehicle and experimental drugs. I wondered if there was a checklist somewhere. Betray your husband? Check. Find a rich boyfriend with expensive toys? Check. Try mysterious substances that sound like they came from a spy movie? Check. The car wasn't hers, Riley continued, stating the obvious. Which means she was a passenger, or she was driving his vehicle. Either way, she was with him willingly. Willingly. That word hung in the air like a bad smell. Even if she'd been drugged, she'd gotten into that car by choice. She'd spent time with Miles Trent by choice. Everything leading up to that crash had been a series of choices, and none of them had included me. Dr. Levin cleared his throat, that universal signal for buckle up, because I'm about to make this worse. He looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as pity mixed with dread, like he was about to kick a puppy and felt bad about it. Mr. Carter, there's something else in your wife's blood work. Something we need to discuss. I gripped the armrests of my chair so hard I'm surprised I didn't leave permanent handprints. Of course there is. Why wouldn't there be? Hit me, document. What else you got? Brain parasites? Vampire syndrome? A previously unknown allergy to being a faithful spouse? He didn't smile. Instead, he pulled up another screen. This one showing different numbers that meant absolutely nothing to my non-medical brain. Your wife is pregnant, Mr. Carter. Approximately 8 weeks along, based on the hormone levels. The room tilted, actually physically tilted, like someone had picked up the entire hospital and given it a good shake. Pregnant. Harper was pregnant. The word bounced around in my skull like a pinball, hitting every nerve ending on its way through. 8 weeks. 2 months. I did the math in my head, counting backward, and felt my stomach drop into my shoes. We hadn't had sex in at least 4 months. Maybe 5. We'd been in that dead zone that happens in marriages sometimes, where you're too tired or too stressed or too busy binge-watching Netflix to remember that physical intimacy is supposed to be a thing. I'd noticed, sure, but I figured we'd get back to it eventually. People go through dry spells. It's normal. Except apparently, Harper's dry spell hadn't included everyone. I stared at Dr. Levin, my brain trying to process this new information and failing spectacularly. Doc, I said slowly, my voice coming out strangled. Unless pregnancy can be transmitted via sarcasm or passive-aggressive arguments about whose turn it is to unload the dishwasher, that's not my child. The doctor's expression confirmed what I already knew. Officer Riley looked away, suddenly finding the peeling paint on the wall absolutely fascinating. Even the box of tissues seemed to be judging me. I understand this is difficult to hear, Dr. Levin said, which was the understatement of the century. Difficult? This had blown past difficult about 17 exits ago. This was catastrophic. This was apocalyptic. This was every country song about cheating wives rolled into one nightmare scenario. Does she know? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. About the pregnancy? We haven't had a chance to tell her yet. She's still unconscious. So Harper didn't even know. She was lying in that hospital bed, bruised and broken, carrying another man's child and completely unaware of it. Part of me wondered if she'd suspected. If that's why she'd been so distant lately, so caught up in her self-improvement journey. Maybe she'd been working up the courage to tell me. Or maybe she'd been planning to pass it off as mine, hoping I wouldn't count the weeks too carefully. I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit in that chair and absorb blow after blow. So let me get this straight, I said, pacing the small office like a caged animal. My wife was having an affair with a luxury car dealer who's now dead. She was drugged with some experimental substance that might have been given to her against her will. And she's pregnant with his kid. Did I miss anything? Any other fun surprises you want to throw at me? Secret gambling debt? Underground fight club membership? Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. Officer Riley finally spoke up. Mr. Carter, we're going to need to investigate this further. The experimental drug, the circumstances of the crash. This is looking more complicated than a simple accident. Yeah, I said, laughing without humor. You think. By morning, the hospital had transformed into what I can only describe as a three-ring circus, except instead of elephants and clowns, we had grief-stricken relatives and news vans. I'd spent the night in one of those waiting room chairs that are scientifically designed to prevent human comfort, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Bush administration, and I'm not sure which Bush. My back felt like I'd been hit by the same car that took out Harper and Miles, and I'm pretty sure I had a permanent crick in my neck that would require a chiropractor and possibly an exorcist to fix. That's when they arrived. Harper's parents, Duncan and Patricia Whitmore, driving up in their Mercedes like they were arriving at a country club instead of a hospital where their daughter was lying unconscious after crashing with her dead boyfriend. I saw them through the window, Patricia already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and Duncan looking like he'd just been informed that his stock portfolio had taken a hit. I briefly considered making a run for it, just bolting out the back entrance and starting a new life in Montana or somewhere equally remote. But before I could formulate an escape plan, they were through the doors, and Patricia's wailing had reached a frequency that I'm pretty sure violated several noise ordinances. "Where is my baby?" she shrieked, loud enough to wake patients in neighboring hospitals. Several nurses looked up from their stations with expressions that ranged from sympathetic to deeply annoyed. Patricia Whitmore had that effect on people. She could make a scene at a library opening. I stood up, bracing myself, and Patricia zeroed in on me like a heat-seeking missile. "Ryan," she sobbed, my name coming out as a theatrical wail that belonged on a soap opera. She rushed toward me, arms outstretched, and for a horrible moment I thought she was going to hug me. Instead, she stopped about 3 feet away and pointed an accusatory finger. "This is your fault." "Excuse me? My fault?" I wasn't the one driving around with a dead luxury car dealer while hopped up on experimental drugs. But sure, let's blame the guy who was at home debugging server code. That made perfect sense. "Patricia, maybe we should." I started, but she was on a roll. "If you had been a better husband, if you had paid attention to her, she wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere." The handkerchief was working overtime now, dabbing at tears that I suspected were at least 50% performance art. Duncan finally stepped in, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder in that way wealthy men do when they're trying to appear both authoritative and compassionate. He looked at me with an expression that could freeze helium. Duncan Whitmore had never liked me. From the moment Harper brought me home 7 years ago, he'd made it clear that an IT specialist wasn't exactly what he'd envisioned for his daughter. He'd probably been hoping for a surgeon or a corporate lawyer, someone who played golf and used words like quarterly earnings in casual conversation. "Carter," he said, my last name dripping with distaste. Not Ryan, not son, just Carter, like I was an employee he was about to fire. "I trust you understand the severity of this situation." The severity, right, because I'd been treating this whole thing like a casual Tuesday. "I'm aware, Duncan," I said, keeping my voice level even though I wanted to scream. "Your daughter's in the ICU after crashing with her boyfriend. I'm pretty up to speed on the severity." Patricia gasped like I'd just sworn in church. "Boyfriend? Boyfriend? How dare you speak about her like that? My Harper would never. She's not. This is slander." I almost laughed. "Slander?" There was a dead guy in the morgue and enough evidence to fill a police report the size of a phone book. But sure, I was making it all up for fun. This was exactly how I wanted to spend my Thursday night and Friday morning, being accused of lying about my wife's affair by her delusional mother. A nurse, Jessica, according to her name tag, approached us cautiously, like she was dealing with wild animals at the zoo. Folks, I'm going to need you to keep your voices down. This is a hospital, and we have other patients who need rest. Patricia turned her theatrical despair on Jessica. My daughter is dying, and you're worried about noise. Your daughter isn't dying, ma'am, Jessica said with the patience of someone who dealt with hysterical family members before and would definitely need therapy later. She's stable and resting. But if you continue to disturb other patients, I'll have to ask you to wait outside. Before Patricia could launch into another aria of grief, a commotion at the hospital entrance caught everyone's attention. News vans, 3 of them, pulling into the parking lot with satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. Reporters were piling out, camera crews in tow, all of them looking like sharks that had just smelled blood in the water. Oh, perfect, I muttered, because this situation definitely needed media coverage. Turns out, Miles Trent's dealership was big enough to attract attention. Trent Luxury Motors wasn't just some small-time operation. It was the place where tech bros bought their Teslas and mid-level executives leased their BMWs to impress people they didn't like. Miles had been a minor celebrity in local business circles, the kind of guy who got quoted in the business section talking about market trends and consumer psychology. One of the reporters, a woman with hair so perfectly styled it looked bulletproof, was already setting up outside the entrance. I could see the headline forming. Local car mogul's affair ends in fiery crash. Or maybe luxury and tragedy, the dark side of success. They'd probably dig up every photo of Miles looking successful and every detail about the crash, turning it into a cautionary tale about wealth and infidelity. My phone started buzzing. Text messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, all of them somehow having seen the news already. Social media was probably exploding. I imagined the posts. OMG, did you see about Harper Carter? I always thought she seemed shady. Her husband must be devastated. Or worse, her husband probably drove her to it. Jessica the nurse touched my arm gently, her expression softening. You poor man, she whispered, low enough that Patricia couldn't hear. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this situation. I almost laughed. Trust me, ma'am, poor isn't the word. Try catastrophically unlucky, or cosmically pranked. At this point, I'm expecting a piano to fall on my head just to complete the experience. She smiled sympathetically. Is there anyone we can call for you? Family? Friends? I thought about it. My parents were retired in Arizona, and the last thing I wanted was to drag them into this nightmare. My brother would just make jokes and tell me I should have seen it coming. My friends from work would be sympathetic, but ultimately useless because what do you even say in a situation like this? Sorry your wife was pregnant with another man's baby after crashing his Porsche? Hallmark doesn't make a card for that. I'm good, I said, which was possibly the biggest lie I'd ever told. But thanks. As Patricia continued her dramatic performance for anyone within earshot, and Duncan made phone calls in the corner. Probably to his lawyer, because rich people's first instinct is always to lawyer up. I found myself watching the doctor. Dr. Levin was at the nurse's station, talking quietly with another physician, and something about his body language was off. He kept glancing toward Harper's room, then at his tablet, then back at the room. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and he had that look people get when they're carrying a secret that's slowly eating them alive. The experimental drug, the mysterious substance they'd found in Harper's blood. Why had Harper been driving that night, if she had been driving at all? And why did the doctor seem so nervous every time I asked questions about the toxicology report? The shock was starting to wear off, that initial numbness that comes with trauma beginning to fade, and in its place was something sharper. Curiosity, the same instinct that made me good at my job, that need to dig into problems, to find the missing piece, to understand how systems worked or why they failed. Something about this whole situation didn't add up. The drugs, the crash, the timing, Miles being under investigation. It felt like I was looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe Harper wasn't just a cheating wife. Maybe she was a victim. Or maybe I was just desperately trying to find an explanation that didn't make me feel like a complete idiot. Either way, I needed answers. Harper woke up around noon, which was perfect timing because I'd just reached that delirious stage of exhaustion where everything seems slightly unreal, like you're living inside a fever dream directed by someone with a really twisted sense of humor. I was in the cafeteria, choking down what the hospital generously called a sandwich. It was more like someone had looked at bread and lunch meat and decided they were enemies that needed to be pressed together against their will, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica the nurse. "She's awake. Asking for you. Asking for me." After everything, Harper was asking for me. Part of me wanted to throw my phone in the trash and just keep walking until I hit Canada. But another part, the part that apparently hadn't learned its lesson about hope and marriage, needed to hear what she had to say. I took the stairs back up to the ICU, partly for exercise and partly because the elevator was packed with Patricia and her entourage of concerned friends who'd shown up like it was awake. The stairwell was quiet, just the echo of my footsteps and the sound of my own thoughts screaming at me to turn around. When I pushed open the door to Harper's room, she was sitting up slightly, propped against pillows, looking like she'd gone 10 rounds with a cement mixer and lost spectacularly. The swelling in her face had gone down a bit, but the bruises were really coming into their own now. A spectacular array of purples and yellows that would have made a sunset jealous. Her eyes, though, were alert, scared, and when she saw me, something flickered across her face that I couldn't quite read. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. The machines around her beeped steadily, a rhythm that felt almost accusatory. "Beep. Your wife cheated. Beep. She's pregnant. Beep. Your life is a dumpster fire." I stood in the doorway, not quite ready to commit to entering fully. "Harper." She looked past me, toward the hallway, her eyes darting like she was expecting someone else to burst in. Then she focused back on me, and the first words out of her mouth weren't, "I'm sorry," or "I can explain," or even "Where am I?" They were, "Did you tell anyone?" I blinked, actually blinked several times, trying to process what I'd just heard. Did I tell anyone? That was her opening line. Not, "Thank God you're here," or "I made a terrible mistake." Just a panic-stricken question about whether I'd spilled her secrets. "Tell anyone?" I repeated slowly, feeling that familiar sarcasm rising up like bile. "You mean did I tell anyone that you crashed your boyfriend's Porsche while high on experimental drugs? Or did I tell anyone that you're pregnant with his kid? Because yeah, Harper, I took out a billboard on the highway. Got a real good rate, too." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and tears started streaming down her face, cutting through the bruises. "Ryan, please." "Please what?" I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me because whatever this conversation was about to become, I didn't need Patricia bursting in and making it worse. "Please don't be angry. Please understand. Please pretend I didn't spend the last 12 hours finding out that my entire marriage was a lie." "It's not what you think," she sobbed, and I actually laughed. Actually laughed out loud like a crazy person, because that had to be the most cliché sentence in the history of infidelity. That's what they all said, right? Every cheater in every movie, every country song, every terrible reality TV show. "Really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because I think it's exactly what everyone on Twitter thinks. You were having an affair with Miles Trent, luxury car dealer and apparently amateur pharmacist. You crashed his car. He died. You didn't. And now you're pregnant with a baby that's definitely not mine since we haven't had sex since the Obama administration. Did I miss anything? Please, enlighten me on what I'm misunderstanding about this situation." Harper's face crumpled, and for a moment I felt bad. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so broken and scared. But then I remembered the evidence bag with the lingerie and the champagne and that stupid love note. "You make me feel alive." And the sympathy evaporated. "Miles was blackmailing me," she said quietly, and the room suddenly felt about 20 degrees colder. I stared at her. "Excuse me." "He was blackmailing me, Ryan." "I wasn't. It wasn't an affair." "Not really. Not like you think." She was talking faster now, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for too long. "He had videos of me. Compromising videos. He said he'd leak them, send them to your work, to my parents, to everyone we know, unless Unless you what?" I demanded, my voice harder than I intended. "Unless you kept sleeping with him? Unless you wrote him love notes and went on romantic drives?" Unless I paid him, she finished, looking at me with eyes that begged me to believe her. He wanted money, Ryan. A lot of money. He said if I didn't pay, he'd ruin both our lives. My brain struggled to catch up. Blackmail. She was claiming blackmail, which would explain some things, but definitely not everything. So the pregnancy? I asked, my voice tight. Was that part of the blackmail too? Did he force you into his bed? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. It started consensually, she admitted, and hearing her say it out loud hurt more than I expected. A few months ago, I met him at a work event. His dealership was sponsoring this charity thing my firm organized. He was charming and attentive and said all the right things. You and I were going through that rough patch, barely talking, and I made a mistake. A mistake, I repeated flatly. That's what we're calling it. But then he changed, she continued, still not looking at me. He started asking for money, said he'd recorded us without my knowledge, had cameras in his apartment. When I tried to break it off, he threatened to expose everything. My job, my reputation, your career. He said he'd destroy it all. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that there was some explanation that made this less horrible, that turned Harper from villain into victim. But the pieces still didn't fit right. The drugs, I said. The doctor found experimental sedatives in your blood. You're saying Miles gave those to you? She nodded, finally meeting my eyes. That night, he called me. Said we needed to talk, that he'd arranged for payment, but I had to meet him. I went because I was desperate to end this. But when I got there, he gave me a drink. Said it would calm my nerves. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, the car, the speed, his hands on the wheel, and then nothing until I woke up here. Dr. Levin chose that moment to enter, tablet in hand, looking like he'd aged about 5 years since I'd last seen him a few hours ago. He glanced between Harper and me, clearly reading the tension in the room. Mrs. Carter, he said professionally, I'm glad to see you're awake. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, Harper said, attempting a weak smile that looked more like a grimace. That's not far from accurate, Levin replied, pulling up her chart. You sustained significant trauma in the crash. You're lucky to be alive. He paused, then added more quietly. We did find traces of a sedative in your bloodstream. A powerful one. Can you tell me anything about what you consumed before the accident? Harper repeated her story about the drink Miles had given her, and I watched Levin's face carefully. He was nodding, taking notes, but something about his expression was off. Not quite surprise, but not quite belief either. More like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. That's consistent with what we found, he said carefully. The compound in your system is a modified benzodiazepine, much stronger than anything commercially available. It would have significantly impaired your judgment and motor control. So Harper had been drugged. That part, at least, seemed true. For the first time since this nightmare started, my anger softened slightly, replaced by something more complicated. She'd still cheated. She'd still lied. But maybe she'd also been trapped in something darker than a simple affair. I was about to say something. What? I don't know, when I noticed Harper's hands. She was fidgeting with the hospital blanket, and that's when I saw it. Or rather, didn't see it. Her wedding ring was gone. Harper, I said slowly, where's your ring? She looked down at her bare finger, and something like panic flashed across her face. I don't know. It must have come off in the crash. But that didn't make sense. Wedding rings don't just fall off, especially not ones that fit properly. And Harper's had fit perfectly. We'd had it resized twice to make sure. Your phone, I said, another piece clicking into place. Where's your phone? The police have it, she said quickly. Too quickly. They took it as evidence. I looked at Dr. Levin. Is that true? He checked his tablet, scrolling through notes. According to the report, no personal effects were recovered from the vehicle except what was in the evidence bags Officer Riley showed you. No phone. No jewelry. Harper's face went pale, paler than it already was, which was saying something. That's impossible. My phone was in my purse. My ring. I never take off my ring. Apparently you did, I said, and the suspicion that had been growing in my gut suddenly felt like a certainty. Or someone took them. Harper, what aren't you telling me? Harper opened her mouth to answer, but before she could say anything, Officer Riley appeared in the doorway like he had some kind of sixth sense for dramatic timing. He had that cop look on his face, the one that says, I've seen some stuff, and I'm about to make your day significantly worse. Mr. Carter, he said, nodding at me, then at Harper. "Mrs. Carter, glad to see you're awake. I need to ask you both some questions when you're feeling up to it." Harper shifted in her bed, wincing from what I assumed was a combination of physical pain and the realization that she was about to be interrogated by the police. "I can talk now," she said quietly, her voice still scratchy. Riley pulled up one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs and sat down, pulling out that weather-beaten notepad of his. "Mrs. Carter, can you walk me through the events of last night? Start from the beginning. When did you first make contact with Mr. Trent?" As Harper started recounting her story, the phone call, the meeting, the drink, I found myself studying her face for tells. After 7 years of marriage, you learn someone's patterns. The way her left eye twitched slightly when she was nervous. How she touched her collarbone when she was lying. And right now, she was doing both. Riley was taking notes, his pen scratching across the paper in quick, efficient strokes. When Harper finished her version of events, he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Carter, we've been going through Mr. Trent's background. Turns out he wasn't just a car dealer. Here we go, I thought. More fun revelations. At this rate, we discover Miles was also a part-time spy or underground cage fighter. Miles Trent was under investigation by the Financial Crimes Division," Riley continued, and I saw Harper's face drain of what little color it had left. "Fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. His dealership was apparently a front for moving money around. We're talking millions of dollars, Mrs. Carter." "I didn't know," Harper said quickly. Too quickly. I had no idea he was involved in anything illegal. So not only was my wife pregnant with a dead man's baby, she might also be implicated in a financial crimes investigation. This was just fantastic. We could write a country song about this. It would top the charts. "Mr. Carter," Riley turned to me. "Did your wife ever discuss her work with you? Mention anything about Trent or his business dealings?" I thought back over the past few months, trying to remember if Harper had said anything. But honestly, we'd barely been talking at all. Our conversations had devolved into logistics. Who was picking up groceries? Whose turn it was to deal with the lawn guy? What we were watching on Netflix? The deep stuff, the work stuff, the real conversations? Those had dried up sometime around New Year's. "No," I said. She kept her work pretty private. Said it was confidential client information, attorney-client privilege, or whatever the accounting version of that is. "Accountant-client privilege isn't really a thing," Riley noted, which seemed like an unnecessarily pedantic point to make given everything else going on. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to need access to any files you have related to the Trent account. Emails, documents, financial records, everything." Harper's hand went to her throat, that nervous tell again. "They're on my work computer. And my phone. But I told Ryan, I don't know where my phone is. It wasn't with me when I woke up." Riley flipped through his notepad to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "Actually, Mrs. Carter, that's something I wanted to ask about. We found several items in the wreckage. The champagne bottle, some clothing, Mr. Trent's wallet and phone. But your personal belongings? Your phone, your purse, your jewelry? Nothing. It's like they were removed from the scene." The room got very quiet. Even the machines seemed to stop beeping for a moment, like they were waiting to hear the answer. "Removed?" Harper repeated. "But that doesn't make sense. Why would someone take my things?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Riley said. "Mr. Carter mentioned you're missing your wedding ring as well." I held up my left hand, where my own ring still sat. She never took it off. Ever. Even when she was sleeping or showering. It was practically welded to her finger. Riley made another note. "So either it came off in the crash, which seems unlikely given that we found Mr. Trent's watch still on his wrist, or someone took it, along with your phone and purse." "But who?" Harper asked, and she genuinely sounded confused. "Miles was the only other person there, and he..." She stopped, the reality hitting her. "He's dead." "Which means," Riley said slowly, "either someone else was at the scene after the crash and before the first responders arrived, or there was someone else in the car." I finished, the pieces clicking together in a way that made my stomach drop. "You're saying someone else was there? A third person?" Riley closed his notepad and stood up. "I'm saying we found some evidence at the crash site that suggests the possibility. Footprints leading away from the vehicle that don't match either your wife's or Mr. Trent's shoes. And here's the interesting part. They led to a second set of tire tracks about 50 yards away." Harper made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. "Someone was watching us." Someone saw the crash, and instead of helping, they what? They robbed me. Or they were looking for something specific, Riley said. Mrs. Carter, is there anything on your phone or in your files that someone might want badly enough to take? Any evidence of financial crimes? Communications with Mr. Trent? Harper's face had gone from pale to green, and for a second I thought she might throw up. Everything, she whispered. All our messages, the financial documents I'd been reviewing, photos he'd sent me. Everything was on that phone. Riley's expression shifted to something harder. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to need you to tell me everything you know about Miles Trent's business operations. And I mean everything. Because right now, it's looking like you might have been the only person who knew enough to expose what he was really doing. And if someone else figured that out, then they'd want her dead, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The next 48 hours were a blur of police interviews, hospital bureaucracy, and me slowly losing whatever remained of my sanity. Harper was moved to a regular room once they were sure she wasn't going to suddenly code or develop some exotic complication. Patricia camped out in the visitor's chair like she was on a stakeout, shooting me dirty looks whenever I dared to breathe too loudly. The news crews eventually got bored and moved on to the next tragedy. Apparently, a local politician's sex scandal was more interesting than my imploding marriage. Can't say I blamed them. I was in the hospital cafeteria again, because apparently that's where I lived now, when Dr. Levin sat down across from me without asking. He looked worse than before, if that was possible. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking slightly, and he had the general appearance of a man who was about 3 seconds away from a complete nervous breakdown. Mr. Carter, he said quietly, glancing around like he was worried someone might overhear. We need to talk. Privately. I looked at my sad excuse for a turkey sandwich. Doc, if you're here to tell me Harper's actually carrying triplets or that Miles Trent was actually a cyborg, I'm not sure I can handle any more plot twists today. He didn't smile. It's about the drug we found in your wife's system. The experimental sedative. Yeah, I remember. You said it wasn't in any database, probably custom-made by someone with connections. You got a lead. Dr. Levin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. Then he said, very softly, it was mine. I blinked. Processed. Reprocessed. I'm sorry, what? The compound in your wife's bloodstream, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a prototype sedative I've been developing. Privately. It's not approved by the FDA, not registered anywhere official. I've been testing it under the table for the past 2 years. My brain felt like it was buffering, that little spinning wheel of confusion just rotating endlessly. You're telling me you created the drug that my wife was on when she crashed? He nodded miserably. I needed extra income. Medical school debt, mortgage, a daughter in college. The hospital salary wasn't cutting it. So I started doing side research, developing pharmaceuticals that I could eventually patent and sell. This sedative was supposed to be revolutionary, faster acting than anything on the market, with fewer side effects. Clearly, the fewer side effects part needs work, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, considering my wife drove into a guardrail while on it. Levin flinched. It wasn't supposed to be used like that. The dosage protocols I developed were for controlled clinical settings, with proper supervision. But he stopped, looking like he might actually cry. I gave samples to a friend, someone who said he had connections in the pharmaceutical industry, who could help me get funding for proper trials. The pieces clicked together with an almost audible snap. Miles Trent. Miles Trent, he confirmed. I met him at a medical charity event about a year ago. He seemed legitimate, said he invested in medical startups. I was desperate, and he was persuasive. I gave him samples, documentation, everything. I thought he was going to help me get the drug approved. But instead he used it to drug women, I said flatly, including my wife. Dr. Levin's hands were really shaking now. I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea what he was doing with it. When your wife came in and I saw the compound in her blood work, I panicked. I knew it was mine. The chemical signature is unique. I leaned back in my chair, trying to absorb this information. My wife's doctor, the man who'd been treating her, who I'd trusted to tell me the truth, had been illegally developing drugs and had inadvertently supplied the substance that led to the crash. This was beyond soap opera territory. This was straight-up conspiracy thriller material. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You illegally developed a sedative. You gave it to Miles Trent. He used it to drug my wife. She crashed. He died. And you've been sitting on this information for 2 days? I was trying to figure out what to do, Levin said desperately. If I come forward, I lose my license, probably go to jail. But if I don't, and someone else figures it out, then you're an accessory to whatever Miles was planning. I finished. Doc, Harper thinks someone was after her phone because it had evidence of financial crimes on it. But what if they were after something else? What if someone knew about your drug? Levin's face went white. The formula. I gave Miles documentation, the complete chemical breakdown. If someone has Harper's phone and she had communications with Miles about the drug, then they could manufacture it themselves, I said, or sell the formula. How much would something like this be worth on the black market? Millions, Levin whispered. Easily millions. I stood up, my sandwich forgotten. You need to talk to Officer Riley. Right now? Tell him everything. But my career. Doc, my wife almost died. Miles Trent did die. And someone out there is desperate enough to steal evidence from a crash site. Your career is the least of anyone's problems right now. When I finally got Levin to Riley, watching the doctor stammer through his confession like a kid admitting he broke a window, I felt something shift. For the first time since that phone call on Thursday, the pieces were starting to fall into place. Dark, ridiculous, straight out of a bad soap opera pieces, but pieces nonetheless. Harper wasn't just a cheating wife. She was a witness, maybe even a target. And I was apparently married to the most complicated woman in the tri-state area. A few weeks later, weeks that felt like years, if I'm being honest, Officer Riley called me with news that somehow managed to shock me despite everything I'd already been through. At this point, I thought I was shock-proof. I developed an immunity to surprise, like I'd been vaccinated against further plot twists. Turns out, life had one more booster shot ready for me. Mr. Carter, we found Miles Trent's storage unit, Riley said over the phone, and I could hear something in his voice. Excitement, maybe, or vindication. You're going to want to come down to the station. I was back at work by then, trying to pretend my life was normal while my wife recovered at her parents' house, and I lived alone in our condo that suddenly felt like a museum of a failed marriage. Every surface held memories I didn't want anymore. The coffee maker we'd bought together, the couch where we'd binged entire seasons of shows, the wedding photos on the wall that now felt like evidence of the world's longest con. The police station was exactly as depressing as I remembered from my previous visits. Same fluorescent lights, same vending machine, same cat poster that I was starting to suspect was mocking me personally. Riley led me to a conference room where several boxes were stacked on the table, each one labeled with evidence tags. We got a warrant for Trent's personal storage facility, Riley explained, pulling on latex gloves and opening the first box. Based on Dr. Levin's testimony and the financial crimes investigation, we had probable cause. What we found was, well, see for yourself. He pulled out a folder and spread its contents across the table. Fake IDs. At least a dozen of them, all with Miles Trent's photo but different names. Michael Traynor, Marcus Tennyson, Mitchell Torres. The guy had more aliases than a spy novel protagonist. He used these to open bank accounts, Riley continued, pulling out another stack of documents. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, Switzerland, Panama. We're talking about 17 different accounts, all under different names, with a combined total of approximately $8 million. $8 million. I whistled low. That's a lot of overpriced sedans. The dealership was barely breaking even, Riley said. All that money came from somewhere else. Embezzlement, investment fraud, blackmail, we're still untangling it all. But here's what I really wanted you to see. He opened a different box and pulled out a photo album. Not a cute scrapbook with stickers and captions, but a meticulously organized collection of surveillance-style photos. Women. At least 20 different women, maybe more. Some were candid shots that looked like they'd been taken without the subject's knowledge. Others were more intimate, clearly taken in bedrooms or hotel rooms. And there, about halfway through, was Harper. I stared at her photo, feeling my stomach turn. It was from before the crash. Obviously, she was smiling, wearing a dress I recognized from a work event last summer. She looked happy, beautiful, completely unaware that she was being cataloged like a specimen in some psychopath's collection. Your wife wasn't his first victim, Riley said quietly. And she wasn't even close to being his last. We've identified 14 other women so far from these photos. We're in the process of contacting them now. Let me guess, I said, my voice tight. They all worked in finance or accounting. They all had access to other people's money. Riley nodded. Most of them worked at firms that handled high-net-worth clients. Trent would romance them, get access to their work computers or files, use the information for his fraud schemes. If they caught on or threatened to expose him, he'd switch to blackmail. Hidden cameras, compromising photos, threats to ruin their careers. I thought about Harper, about how scared she'd looked when she told me about the videos, how desperate she'd sounded. And I realized with a sinking feeling that she'd been telling the truth. Maybe not about everything. She'd still cheated, still made choices that destroyed our marriage, but about being trapped, about being a victim. Some of these women paid him, Riley continued. Thousands of dollars over months or years just to keep him quiet. Others just disappeared from his life, and we're not sure if that's because he let them go or because something worse happened. We're still investigating. The implications of that hung in the air like a bad smell. Something worse. Other women who maybe didn't survive their encounters with Miles Trent. Other crashes that weren't accidents. Over the next few days, the story exploded bigger than before. The first news coverage had been about a car dealer's affair gone wrong. Now it was about a criminal enterprise, a predator who'd used his charm and his business as cover for years of fraud and exploitation. The tabloids went crazy, naturally. Every news outlet from CNN to the local community blog was running stories. The headlines shifted. Car mogul's dark secret. Years of fraud and blackmail exposed. Wife of IT specialist helps uncover criminal ring. Multiple women come forward against dead dealership owner. That IT specialist was me, by the way. My 15 minutes of fame consisted of being referred to as the husband in articles about my wife's criminal boyfriend. Not exactly how I'd imagined making the news. Harper testified against Dr. Levin in exchange for immunity. She handed over everything she had. Email records she'd backed up to a cloud server Miles didn't know about. Financial documents she'd photographed as insurance. Text messages that showed his threats. She helped the FBI untangle his network of shell companies and fraudulent accounts. The tabloids loved her for it. Suddenly, she wasn't the cheating wife anymore. She was the brave survivor who'd helped bring down a criminal. They ran photos of her leaving the courthouse, looking pale and fragile, with headlines like "Finding Strength After Trauma" and "One Woman's Fight for Justice." I watched it all from the sidelines, feeling like an extra in a movie about my own life. When the trial was over and Dr. Levin was sentenced, 5 years for illegal drug development and distribution, plus losing his medical license forever, Harper came to the condo. Our condo. The one we'd picked out together, back when we was still a thing. She stood in the doorway looking thin and tired. Her bruises finally faded, but replaced by something harder to heal. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her into what used to be our home. She looked around like she was seeing it for the first time, touching surfaces gently, like she was saying goodbye. "I'm sorry," she said finally, turning to face me. "For everything. For the affair, for the lies, her voice broke. "I was scared and stupid, and I made terrible choices. But I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I believed that she'd been scared, that she'd been manipulated and trapped. That Miles Trent had been a predator who'd targeted her specifically because she was vulnerable. But that didn't change what she'd done. It didn't erase the betrayal or rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't automatically heal the wound. "Can you forgive me?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Can we try again?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. But I also saw a stranger. Someone who'd been capable of secrets I never suspected, of choices I didn't understand. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now? Harper, I don't even know who you are anymore." She nodded, crying harder, and I felt something in my chest crack. Not break, it was already broken. Just crack a little more. That's when my phone buzzed. A letter had arrived at the condo, forwarded from the hospital. From Dr. Levin. Prison mail. I opened it right there, Harper watching, and read words that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Carter, I never told you everything. Miles had a partner. Someone close to your wife, someone who knew about the drug and the fraud operation. They were after something hidden in her firm's servers. The crash wasn't random. Be careful who you trust. There's still someone out there who wanted Harper dead. I looked up at Harper, who'd gone white as a sheet. What does he mean? Someone close to me, she whispered. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Months later, I was standing in my living room at 3 in the morning, holding a screaming baby and questioning every life choice I'd ever made. Not just the big ones, like staying with Harper or believing that our marriage could somehow survive industrial strength betrayal and a criminal investigation, but also the smaller decisions, like why I'd thought having a second cup of coffee at 9 p.m. was a good idea, or why I'd ever believed that babies were cute instead of recognizing them for what they really are, tiny dictators who communicate exclusively through screaming. The baby, our baby, somehow, against all odds and basic mathematics, was named Oliver. Oliver James Carter. He had Harper's eyes and my complete inability to sleep at reasonable hours. The DNA test had come back 3 weeks after he was born, and I'd stared at those results for a solid 10 minutes, reading and rereading the words 99.9% probability of paternity, like they were written in ancient Sanskrit. Turns out, Harper had gotten pregnant during one of those rare nights when we'd actually managed to connect physically before everything went to hell. The timeline matched up once we really looked at it. She'd been about 6 weeks along when she met Miles, not 8 like the first estimate suggested. The universe, in its infinite sense of humor, had decided to play the longest, cruelest prank imaginable, letting me think I was raising another man's kid for months, letting that belief poison everything, only to reveal that nope, surprise, the baby was mine all along. Science really is full of plot twists. Someone should write a strongly worded letter to whoever's in charge of irony. Oliver finally stopped screaming and started making those gurgling sounds that babies make when they're either content or plotting your demise. Hard to tell which. I walked him over to the window, looking out at the city lights, and tried to remember what sleep felt like. It had been a concept once, a thing I used to do regularly. Now it was like a legend, a myth, something I told stories about to other exhausted parents. I once slept for 8 consecutive hours, I'd say, and they'd look at me with awe and disbelief, like I was describing seeing a unicorn. Harper was asleep in our bedroom again, because apparently I was either very forgiving or very stupid, and the jury was still out on which. After everything that happened, the trial, the media circus, the revelation about Miles's criminal enterprise, we'd tried separation. I'd moved into a hotel for a month while she stayed with her parents. We'd done therapy, both individual and couples, with a therapist who charged enough per hour that I'm pretty sure she could have retired after treating us alone. And slowly, painfully, like setting a broken bone that hadn't healed right the first time, we tried to rebuild something. Not the old marriage. That was dead and buried along with Miles Trent and my naive trust in happy endings. But something new. Something built on the wreckage of what we'd been. Constructed from honesty and fear and the desperate hope that people could actually change. Some days it felt possible. Other days it felt like we were cosplaying as a functional couple, going through motions without any real substance behind them. Tonight, at 3 a.m. with a baby who decided sleep was for the weak, I honestly couldn't tell which kind of day tomorrow would be. I walked back to the bedroom. Oliver finally conked out against my shoulder and found Harper sitting up in bed. She was pale in the moonlight coming through the curtains, her hair messy from sleep, looking like both a stranger and the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. It was disorienting, that double vision. Like one of those optical illusions where you can see either a vase or 2 faces, depending on how you look at it. Is he down? She whispered, and I nodded, gently placing Oliver in the bassinet next to our bed. He stirred but didn't wake, which felt like a minor miracle. For now, I said, climbing back into bed. But I give it 30 minutes before he's back up demanding attention and possibly my soul. Harper smiled slightly, that sad smile she'd perfected over the past few months. You're good with him, she said quietly. Better than I thought you'd be. Yeah, well, turns out threatening to debug his crying like he's malfunctioning software actually works sometimes. Who knew? We lay there in the darkness, not quite touching but not quite separate either. This was our life now. This weird liminal space between together and apart, between forgiveness and resentment, between hope and resignation. That's when I remembered the letter. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, forwarded from my work address this time. Prison mail again, Dr. Levin's handwriting on the envelope, and I'd almost thrown it away without reading it. I'd gotten 3 letters from him already. The first warning about Miles's partner, the second apologizing profusely for his role in everything, the third rambling about redemption and second chances. I was tired of Levin's guilt and his confessions and his desperate attempts to be absolved by the people he'd hurt. But something made me open this one. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, probably both. The letter was short, just a few lines. Mr. Carter, I never told you everything. I was afraid. But I can't die with this secret. The experimental drug I gave Miles wasn't just a sedative. It has another property I discovered during testing. It can enhance suggestibility, make people more compliant. That's why he wanted it. Not to sedate them, but to control them. I think Harper knows more than she told you. I think she saw something that night, something she can't remember because of the drug. Ask her about the servers at her firm. Ask her what Miles really wanted. There's still something more you need to know. I'd read that letter about 50 times, each time feeling sicker. Enhanced suggestibility. Mind control, basically, dressed up in scientific language. Miles hadn't just been drugging women to assault them or blackmail them. He'd been literally controlling them, making them compliant, making them do things they wouldn't normally do, including Harper. I'd asked her about it, about what she remembered from that night. But she insisted her memory ended with getting into the car, just like she'd always said. The crash, the events leading up to it, everything in between, it was just gone, wiped clean by whatever that drug had done to her brain. But what if it wasn't wiped? What if it was just buried? Harper, I said into the darkness, not sure if she was still awake. Yeah. Do you ever dream about that night? About the crash? She was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, she admitted. Fragments. Miles saying something about codes, about access. His phone ringing over and over. Someone else's voice, but I can't tell if it's a memory or just my brain making things up. Someone else. The partner Levin kept mentioning. The person who'd been at the crash scene, who'd taken Harper's phone and her ring. The knock at the door that night, months ago when we'd first read Levin's warning. It had been Patricia, Harper's mother, showing up unannounced with casseroles and unsolicited advice. False alarm. But it had felt significant at the time, like a horror movie jump scare that never materialized. Now, lying in the dark with my son sleeping nearby and my wife beside me. My wife who might still be hiding secrets, or might be a victim of manipulation so profound she couldn't even remember it. I felt that same sense of impending dread. I thought about Miles's partner, still out there somewhere. About the firm's servers and whatever Miles had been trying to access. About Harper's missing phone and whether whoever took it had found what they were looking for. Ryan. Harper's voice was small in the darkness. Do you think we're going to be okay? I looked at her, at the moonlight catching the tears on her cheeks, and I realized I didn't know. I didn't know if we'd make it, if trust could be rebuilt from ashes, if love could survive this much damage. But I knew I was going to try. For Oliver. For the ghost of what we'd been. For the stubborn, stupid hope that maybe broken things could be fixed if you were willing to do the work. Yeah, I lied, or maybe it wasn't a lie. We're going to be okay. Harper moved closer, resting her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. We stayed like that for a while, pretending that the world outside our bedroom wasn't waiting with more revelations, more twists, more ways to prove that marriage was basically a lifetime commitment to being surprised by increasingly bizarre plot developments. I smiled to myself in the darkness, muttering, marriage really does come with bonus DLC. Should have read the terms and conditions more carefully. Harper made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. What are you talking about? Nothing, I said. Just thinking about how our relationship has more plot twists than a telenovela written by someone on a really aggressive cocktail of stimulants. This time she definitely laughed, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. Not heal. It was going to take a lot more than shared dark humor to fix what had been broken. But maybe, just maybe, we were taking the first real steps towards something that looked like recovery. Oliver stirred in his bassinet, making those pre-crying sounds that every parent learns to dread. I started to get up, but Harper beat me to it, lifting our son with a gentleness that made my throat tight. As I watched her rock him, whispering softly, I couldn't shake Dr. Levin's words echoing in my mind. There's still something more you need to know. Because of course there was. There was always something more. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness except for the glow of the city outside. And I lay there, ready as anyone could be, for whatever crazy twist life had left up its sleeve.